Hello learners, I am Dr. Subodh Kesharwani working with Indira Gandhi National Open University in School of Management Studies. The topic which I am going to talk today is processing of data. I think in our preceding sessions we have talked a lot about data, and this today's session revolves around research methodology and statistical analysis, which is part of our course called MCU3, and it's related to the program called MCOM. So prior to going into the depth of this topic, I just want to throw a light what exactly we have recapitulated, what exactly we have done in our preceding sessions, because when we talk about the research methodology, when we talk about the statistical analysis, there is a great use of the today's session, because in our preceding sessions we have talked a lot. The whole blog was talking about the research and data collections, and if we go more into the depth of this research and data collection, we realize that we have already covered the introduction to research plan, collection of data, how the sampling is going to be done. Either it could be a random sampling or non-random sampling, or measurement of screening techniques, which could be the comparative in nature or non-comparative in nature. So this particular the first block which emphasizes on the collection of modus operandi of collecting the data, and we have seen that how the data collection is going to play a very important role. And now the second block, which revolves around the processing and preservation of data, because how we are going to process the data, because in the first the block we have devoted somewhere around 10 to 12 lectures which was talking on the data collection, and the second block was purely emphasizing on processing and preserving of data. So as far as this particular block is concerned, we have got certain chapters, certain units which are going to talk about certain parameters, but the today's session revolves around the processing of data. So if you go more into the depth of processing of data, you will find out that that this data process is very important, because if you see this particular steps in quantitative research starts with the theory, then you have the hypothesis, and we have already have a very elaborative session which talks about what exactly the hypothesis is, how this alternate hypothesis differs from null hypothesis, and when we are going to accept the hypothesis, when we are going to reject the hypothesis. So this particular session was talking about that factors, and now the third part was the research design, that how we are going to design our research. It's not just a lot of planning is involved, because there are certain problems which need to be taken care. So research design talks about something which could not be done at the mid or at the end, but at the preamble stage or at the preliminary stage. So operationalizing concepts, and the finally selecting a research site, that is more important, and then selecting respondents, then data collection. And now already we have talk about the collection of data, which talks about the data collection as far as the secondary data is concerned, as far as the primary data is concerned. So we have a very elaborative sessions. Then the today's discussion revolves around the data processing, and you see that after you process the data, there are certain analysis which need to be done, then finding and conclusion, and then how you are going to publish your results. So this is all about the steps which you are going to follow, and this data processing is very important, because when you go more into the depth of processing of data, you will find out that there are certain ingredients which are very important as far as the processing of data is concerned. So one is editing of data, then you have coding of data. Editing means like whatever the data you have is in a raw format, now you're going to convert into a finished goods. For that the editing is going to play a very important role, or already the finished data is there which need to be revamped. So editing of data, we will definitely throw a light on, elaborately go into the depth of this editing of data. Then coding of data is concerned. So how you are going to decode or code the data so that it can be encrypted or decrypted and used for the particular purpose. Then classification of data is there, where we are going to talk about types of classification according to external characteristics, classification according to internal characteristics, and preparation of frequency distribution. So this is a part which is dedicatedly talking or with respect to classification of data. And then we have tabulation of data, like types of tables, parts of statistical tables, and requisites of good statistical tables, because when you are going to tabulate anything, I think it's going to become quite easier, and it could be in a very competitive format or in a tabulated format, and which could be quite conducive as far as the data analysis is concerned. So anyway, this processing of data we have already talked about, and if you go more into the depth of that, it's talk about the many things. Now the types of data is going to be bifurcated into qualitative data and quantitative data. As far as the scaling techniques of measurement is concerned, we have already talked about the four important ingredients, that is nominal, ordinal, ratio, and we over there we have seen that how this qualitative and quantitative data is going to be measured. But here we are talking more about the qualitative and quantitative data, because these data is going to be types of data is going to be bifurcated into qualitative and quantitative. So when you are going to talk about the qualitative, it's again bifurcated into nominal and ordinal, whereas quantitative is going to be bifurcated into discrete and continuous. So nominal, two or more categories are not in any particular order or rank. Example given: blood groups A, B, A positive or B positive, or AB or O positive, or area of residence north, south, east, west and center. So this is considered to be the nominal, whereas ordinal is category are in order of ranks, that is moderate and severe. And on the other hand, when you are going to talk about the quantitative data, it is going to be bifurcated into discrete and continuous. So counted in whole numbers, that is example number of family members, or continuous can have factors. Example given: height of 161.5 centimeters of blood glucose level. So this is going to be considered, and there are certain more examples which can give what exactly the quantitative variables are and what exactly the qualitative variables are. So when you are going to talk about the quantitative variables, one that can be measured and expressed numerically, that need to be considered as a quantitative variable. The measurement convey information regarding amount, and there are certain examples like blood pressure, heart rate, the heights of adult males, the weights of preschool children, and the ages of patients seen in a dental clinic. These are considered to be the example of quantitative variables. On the other hand, when you are going to talk about the qualitative variables, the characteristics that can be measured quantitatively but can be categorized, the measurement convey information regarding the attribute, the measurement in real sense can't be achieved, but person, place or thing belonging to different categories can be counted. Example given: the sex of the patient, color and odor of stool and urine samples, etc. are considered to be the qualitative variables. Now we have seen that when we have bifurcated the data, I think that data processing is generally, if we go and talk about the data processing is generally the collection and manipulation of items of data to produce meaningful information. The intention is very clear that whatever the data is there, we are going to make it meaningful, we are going to use it for the particular purpose, or we are going to customize those data. So for customization, when you are going to customize the data for the particular purpose or for the tailor-made use, I think there the data processing is going to be a very important aspect, and in this sense it can be considered as subset of information processing. So the change of information in any manner detectable by an observer, and we have seen that there are certain tools right now, there are certain technologies, there are certain computers, or the gadgets are there which are, or the customized softwares are there, which we are going to talk more in our coming sessions, or in the preceding session we have thrown a light that what is data processing. So data processing is basically is a method of processing the data. It could be in the format of table, it could be in the form of editing, or it could be in the form of coding. So anyway, we see that the data collection is the first step, then data preparation is there, then data entry is there, then data processing is there. So while talking about the data processing, I think we have to follow the first three steps, that is collecting the data, data preparation, data entry, and then data interpretation, and finally the data storage is there. So if you are going to talk about the data storage, I think data storage is a very important aspect, because this data storage is going to store whatever the data you have processed, or the finished data, which can be used in a real-time manner or in a different manner. So anyway, if we see this particular steps, the first part talks about acquisition, the second is going to talk about the publishing, third is curation, 4 is processing, 5 is how the movement is going to be done, and 6 is also talking more about that, and 7 is the use. So anyway, what we have observed that if you go more into the depth of research data cycle, This research data cycle is more talking about the data planning and design, data collection, data processing, data study and analysis, and data preservation and data reuse. We have already talked about, and all those things require a lot of literature review, a lot of the secondary mode of collecting the data, the primary mode of collecting the data. So anyway, we have thrown a light on the glimpse of certain data, how we are going to move into the process of data, and what could be the do's and don'ts which we have to follow. It's not like that you can process the data at the very beginning stage. The modus operandi is very clear. You start with the collection of data, then you can do certain methodologies, and then you can process the data. So the collecting data in research is processed. Whatever the data we have collected in research is processed and analyzed to come to some conclusion or to verify the hypothesis made. So what we observe that when we develop the hypothesis, it could be either alternate hypothesis or null hypothesis, or it could be the accepted or rejected. So in that case, whatever the data we use to collect, whether it could be in a primary mode or a secondary mode, we see that processing of data is important, as it makes further analysis of data easier and efficient. Because when you process the data, you do a lot of further analysis, and processing of data technically means, if we go more into the backdrop of processing of data, it is basically editing of the data, coding of the data, classification of data, and then tabulation of data. So we start with editing. We see what are the rectification need to be required. Then we code or decode it so that it can be, and then classify of data, and then finally tabulation of data. So we are going to cover these 4 points in a more elaborative manner. And if we start with purpose of editing, the process of checking and adjusting responses in the completed questionnaires for omission, legibility and consistency, and reading them for coding and storage, this is one of the important purpose of editing. And if you go more into the depth of purpose of editing, you will find out accuracy of data collected. Whatever the data we have collected, it need to be accurate. For consistency between responses, there must be a synchronization. There must be a homogeneity between the responses which need to be come by the respondents, and uniformity is there. It's not like that whatever the question, there must be some questions which can given to some of the respondents and some are not. So while doing all those things, the uniformity or homogeneity need to be maintained. So for completeness in response, to reduce effects of item non-responses, to facilitate and simplify coding and tabulation. This is one of the way by which you can do the editing, and then to better utilize question answered out of order. So whatever the questions near we have floated to the respondents, and when they reciprocate, I think you are going to utilize that answer in a more systematic manner. This could be the purpose of editing. So now when you are going to talk about the coding, the process of identifying and classifying each answer with a numerical score or other character symbol, so that we can have some coding in between, and this can somewhat make the job quite easier, or it can make the things in a more different manner. So the numerical score or symbol is called a code, and serves as a rule for interpreting, classifying and recording data. So what we have observed, that when you are going to record the data, I think the numerical score or symbol is called a code, and this can somewhat make the things quite easier. So identifying responses with codes is necessary if data is to be processed by computer. So now what we observe, that tabulation is the process of summarizing raw data and displaying the same in compact form, that is in the form of statistical table for further analysis. And when mass data has been assembled, it becomes necessary, because what we observe, that when we are going to talk about the data, I think the data is now gigantic in nature. That is the reason in technology we used to talk about big data analytics, because big data talks about the data which are known as a mass data, and it becomes necessary for the researchers to arrange the same in some kind of concise logical order, which may be called tabulation. Because if you tabulate the data, I think you can very easily make it in a table format or in a logical order, which can be quite useful for understanding the data analysis. There are rules for tabulation. The table should suit the size of the paper, and therefore the width of the column should be decided beforehand. Number of columns and rows should neither be too large nor too small. As far as possible, figures should be approximated before tabulation. This would reduce unnecessary details. So what we have observed that when you are going to talk about rules for tabulation, I think there are certain things which need to be taken care, and items should be arranged either in alphabetical, chronological or geographical order or according to size. Because when you are going to make a table, I think there are certain fields which need to be pre-decided, or there are certain columns which need to be made. So if you make a table in that format, I think somewhere the things are going to be solved. So there are no hard and fast rules for the tabulation of data, but for constructing good table, following general rules should be observed while tabulating statistical data. So what we observe that when you are making the classification of data leads to the problem of presentation of data, and the presentation of data means exhibition of the data in such a clear and attractive manner that these are easily understood and analyzed. So there are many forms of presentation of data, of which the following three are well known, that is textual presentation, tabular presentation, diagrammatic presentation, video presentation of data. So what we have observed that when you are going to talk about the diagrammatic presentation, we have a full-fledged session which is going to talk about diagrammatic presentation of data. It could be the one two-layer diagram or one-layer diagram, or there are certain parameters which need to be followed. So we are going to have a full-fledged session which talks about diagrammatic presentation. Now there are certain advantages of tabulation. So it simplifies complex data, it facilitates comparison, it facilitates computation. So what we observe that whenever you have got a complex data, there are certain data which need to be quite complex in nature. So how you are going to simplify that data, how you are going to put the data in that format, for that we have observed that this tabulation is very important. It facilitates comparison, it facilitates computation also. How you are going to compute the data, it presents facts in minimum possible space. So tabulated data are good for references, and they make it easier to present the information in the form of graphs and diagrams. So what we have observed that when you are going to tabulate the data, these are the certain things which need to be taken care. And classification of data is again talking about the data classification, which emphasize more on sorting and categorizing data into various types, forms or any other distinct class. So data classification enables the separation and classification of data according to data set requirements for various business or personal objectives. It is mainly a data management process. So what we observe that when you are going to classify the data, I think there are certain data management process which need to be followed, because data management process is going to what you have seen that these data are unscattered in nature or unstructured. So now if you see this particular image, you will find out that it is going to be classify in terms of circles or the squares or rectangles or these triangles. So classification of data can be bifurcated either in geographical classification or chronological classification, qualitative classification, quantitative classification, alphabetical classification. So these are the classification of data, and 4 steps data classification process are there. Define the objectives of the data classification process, create workflows based on the selected classification tools, define the categories and classification criteria, define outcomes and usage of classified data. So what we have observed that when we are going to classify or the data, these are the 4 processes which need to be considered. So, and there are certain comparison between the classification and tabulation. So classification is basically talking about arranging the data into different groups based on their characteristics, whereas tabulation talks about representing the data in more organized way, for example in rows and columns. It takes places after the data has been collected and happens after the classification. So tabulation is something which can be governed after we have classified, and methods of arranging the data, they arrange data based on their characteristics and behavior, arranged in rows and columns, which we have already talked about. And the best example is the spreadsheet. In Excel spreadsheet, we see that we tabulate the data in rows and column, and the fields are quite big in numbers. So, and analyze the data much easier to help represent data. This is what we have we have covered in this particular session, and we have seen that how the things are going to be done with the help of that. So anyway, I think we have talked a lot about this particular thing, and we have seen that how this data processing of data is quite important. And when you are going to process the data, I think up to some extent you lead to a conclusion, and which can help you in interpreting the results in a more systematic manner. So in our next session we are going to talk about something which is over and above to that, that is diagrammatic presentation of data. And this diagrammatic presentation of data is more talking about the way of the data which you need to be put in that format. Thank you very much.